So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. Our guest today is Steve Katanas. Steve is the head of region and mature markets for Australia and New Zealand for HID. Steve, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good morning, John. I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, Steve, for those people who perhaps aren't familiar, can you tell us a little bit about HID and who they are?
HID is a company that's been around and part and owned by Assa Abloy, parent company. And this HID is an expert in delivering trusted identity solutions through a variety of platforms. And most people in Australia know HID from the little blue label on the card readers that are outside their buildings and the credentials that they carry in their hand. So that's most people's recollection of HID from a physical access control perspective.
Fantastic. So given that HID is one of the global players or one of the larger players in the global space around access control, and that you deal primarily with mature markets, I was wondering, what are some of the trends that you're seeing in the access control space at the moment that security managers and others in this area should be watching for?
Sure. Some of the trends that HID is seeing in the industry really center around the digital credential experience. So one of the things that we're seeing post-pandemic is the significant interest and significant increase in activity and queries around digital credentials, what they are, how they work, how are they delivered, and what are the benefits that end customers can get from that digital experience.
Okay. So when you're talking about digital credentials, I'm assuming, is this what we used to refer to as mobile credentials? Is this something that you see as replacing physical access tokens, traditional access tokens like cards and fobs and things like that, or are these an adjunct too? And the reason I ask is because I guess for people who were perhaps early adopters of digital tokens, they were a bit clunky and slow and may have sort of moved away from it for a while and thought, oh, that's not there yet. Do you see them getting to the point, or are they now at a point where they're as fast and reliable as physical access tokens? And do you see them eventually replacing physical access tokens?
So let's start with the last part of the question. Do I see digital credentials replacing physical credentials? I think from an industry perspective, there are experts that have predicted the digital credential will overtake the physical credential that we're carrying in our wallets and cards as ID cards much faster than it actually has occurred. And I think part of that has got to do with the way customers have utilized the credentials, the infrastructure that has been used to produce those credentials. You talked about some speed. So the transaction from a digital credential to a physical access control reader using an NFC experience is very similar to a card. So the digital credential, and I think one of the terms that we've heard out there in the marketplace is Bluetooth credentials, which is a little bit of a cross and an error in actually what it is. The credential is a digital credential that is stored on the phone, and it replicates what the physical credential properties are, like formats, bit codes, identifying John as card number 5 in an access control system. But then the way the credential is transmitted to the reader is either via NFC or via Bluetooth. We believe that I think there's a part to play for physical cards and digital cards into the future. I think it'll be greater than 50-50 digital credentials, and the adoption of digital credentials is going to be a lot greater as the smartphone adoption increases and people are used to transacting their banking credentials, for example, and at the payment terminals with digital credentials and digital wallets, etc. That's really going to accelerate the adoption of digital.
Yeah, I have to be honest with you. I'm surprised that we haven't actually picked up digital credentials and run with them faster. I can see a range of benefits. I mean, most people won't leave home without their mobile phone. If they do leave home without their mobile phone, they'll usually go back and get it. they're not likely to lend their mobile phone to someone else. So I can see a range of benefits here. I'm just surprised that it's taken as long as it has. Why do you feel there's been a slightly slower uptake?
I think as part of the response to the uptake on digital credentials, there is an element of infrastructure that needs to be spent. So readers in the field, customers may not have readers that are digital credential compatible. So there is a time lag for customers to be able to invest in infrastructure that will support digital credentials.
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense, I suppose, if you've got to update readers and replace readers and all the rest of it. I mean, from your perspective, what are the biggest benefits of the digital credentials over traditional credentials?
I think some of the things that you touched on earlier, that Monday morning crush of I've left my pass at home and lining up to get a temporary pass. From an organisational perspective, the ability to remotely issue and remotely revoke a credential is really strong. And in a post-pandemic environment, in the return to work environment that we're seeing, organisations are really looking for that touchless issuance experience. So, walking up to a counter, putting your hands on a counter, receiving a physical card from someone who's actually touched it, those kind of barriers are removed when we have an over-the-air delivery experience.
Yeah. And I guess from a facilities management point of view, there's also a significant saving to be realized from a digital credential over physical traditional credentials, because you're not having to reissue, you're not having to supply and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think the cost savings come in many forms. I think the cost savings come in the price of credentials, but also in what we call the total cost of ownership of the credential. What is that process of the issuance? How many people need to be involved in the process of producing a physical card? The logistics of shipping, the logistics of ordering. So that the process of the delivery of those credentials is much faster than it used to be.
Yeah, and I guess in some ways more secure, because if someone steals my mobile phone, I'm going to notice that's gone a lot faster than I might notice, say, an access badge or a fob is necessarily missing.
Yeah, correct, John. I think the fact that people won't hand their phone to somebody else to get through a door, for example, it's your personal data. It's it's an expensive device that people are carrying with them. So there's a great reluctance to share that device with another individual for legitimate purposes, or potentially purposes that aren't so.
Yeah. Well, the use of digital credentials is interesting because it segues into the next thing that I want to ask you about, because with any sort of digital credential, I imagine that you're using some sort of biometric to access the credential on your phone, whether it be your face or your thumbprint or whatever it may be. So in that context, do you believe that we will eventually get to the point where the most readily form of accessible credential, being biometrics, ends up becoming the predominant form of credential that we use? And if so, why do you believe there's been such hesitancy up until now to adopt biometrics? I mean, it seems that we're very slow on the uptake in this space.
Let's address the hesitancy first of biometrics in the marketplace. I think as people, as you rightly mentioned, smartphone proliferation, and not only the smartphone proliferation and the uptake, but also the smartphones that have the capability to have a biometric authentication on them. The user acceptance of that biometric is becoming more the norm. People are happy to do face ID to log onto their phone, or to put their finger on the back of the phone on the fingerprint sensor to unlock their phone. So it is becoming more the norm and more accepted. What people, I think, have feared from a biometrics perspective, in the traditional sense, where you walk up to a reader and you're putting the fingerprint, you're presenting your finger to a reader, or from a facial recognition perspective, is who owns that data? how secure is it? When I leave an organization, can I be assured that it's been destroyed, removed, deleted, for example? So I think that barrier in terms of somebody else owning my biometric for purposes other than for criminal purposes, or the idea that somebody can take my biometric from a system and use it to frame me for an incident, for example. And that's the low level understanding, or I guess what's the word for it, where people are misunderstanding what it could be used for and how it could be misused. So there is a little bit of a fear factor there.
I guess, as we go on and as people understand more about how biometrics work and how they're used and all the rest of it, and that they're really only just storing an algorithm, do you envision that we'll see less reticence and more acceptance of those access credentials?
I think as people start to accept and want seamless experiences, so the old Star Trek days, they want to be able to walk up to a door and a door automatically opens up. So that usability and that seamless experience that people are searching for, I think may drive adoption to biometrics as well.
Sorry, go on.
I think on the facial, certainly that's the case. I think there'll still be some hesitancy on fingerprint based on what's happened over the last couple of years with from a pandemic perspective, and the reticence to be able to touch things that are multi-touched by multiple people.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me too that in the last sort of probably, I guess it's 5 years now, because the last 2 years just disappeared into the ether. There's been a significant advance in facial recognition too, with the combination of, deep machine learning and artificial intelligence and neural networks, and the ability to be able to search large databases of faces very, very quickly, which previously wasn't really available to a lot of companies and producers of these sorts of things. That's accelerated stuff a lot. Would that be a correct assumption?
I think so. And I think computing power has also, and speed, because early biometrics had a time lag effect, and it was slower than a card presentation. So that's one of the things that also hampered acceptance of those technologies. But I think the way of the future, it won't be a single biometric that is deployed and is most usable. It might be a combination of something you're carrying plus a biometric plus a behavioral thing that will really identify you and speed up that experience that you have from that access point or that secure point that you're trying to get through. So I certainly agree that biometrics will play a part in acceptance increasing in the future, and play a big part in the way we interact in the physical security environment.
Yeah, because I imagine in high security facilities like government buildings and other places where you can't necessarily take a mobile phone in with you, so that digital credential is no longer an access option, you're limited to either a PIN code, a physical access token, or some sort of biometric access token. So I guess until we fully embrace the biometric side of things, we're always going to have that need for the physical or traditional access credential.
Correct. And I think cost has a part to play in that as well, in terms of capital costs to implement technologies like this. Those kind of technologies also have operational costs associated with those, as do traditional identification technologies. So I don't think there's going to be a 100% one way or the other. I think there's always going to be a combination of everything. I think cards will exist with digital credentials, with biometrics in the future, through a variety of market segments, high security to the apartment building, for example.
Yep. So we've touched on digital credentials and we've touched on biometrics, but from your point of view and from HID as a company's point of view, what are the big trends that you see coming over the horizon over the next sort of, say, 5 years?
it's hard to predict what's going to happen in 5 years' time because things change so quickly. But if we look at the moment, I think one of the big things and the strongest things is data. So, what is it? There are a variety of data points that are available to security operators today, and ever increasing. And the trends that I see are, what are we going to do with that data? What are the systems and what are the software solutions, and how is AI and how is machine learning going to play a part in giving us situational awareness with all those data points? Can those data points help us to prevent an incident occurring? Or can those data points help us recover quicker from an incident that's occurred? Or can those data points help us map together what actually occurred so we can provide that information to authorities to take further action? So I think that AI and machine learning and software systems and data manipulation and data situational awareness solutions that manage those data, and those IoT devices that will start to play an important part in that data picture as well. For me, that's what I see as a big trend in the future.
Yeah. Traditionally, access control systems have been very siloed. Access control was seen as controlling access to authorized people in authorized areas of the buildings. I'm wondering whether or not you think we're seeing a shift now, though, where in a lot of areas across the security spectrum, we're having to do more with less and make smarter decisions around how we use the resources that we've got in better and better ways. So we talked before about digital credentials and the fact that in order to fully embrace digital credentials, there's a certain element of upgrade that needs to happen throughout the corporation and the facilities and all the rest of it. But the reality is, it seems to me anyway, if we tie those access points into things like energy saving plans for the building, so I can now use my access control system to control heating and ventilation and lighting and all sorts of other environmental controls. And this isn't new, by the way. I mean, you and I both know this has been an idea that's been on the table for some years now. But if we were to more fully embrace this, the reality is, I imagine those upgrades could pay off the access control upgrades within a matter of a year or two.
Yeah, agreed. I think you hit a nail on the head there with regards to, if we look at what HRD is an expert in from a card reader and identity perspective, those access points in the future are going to serve multiple purposes. One, to give you and to remain as a secure challenge point to get past into a non-secure area, or into a secure area from the non-secure side. It's going to give you occupancy counting and the systems, and again, it's all part of this the data that's been provided. So the data is there that John presented his card to get through that door. If John was the last person to present his card to get out of that door, then that should be enough of a trigger to the HVAC system to start turning the lights off, turning air conditioning off, for example. And to your point, more with less, these physical access control readers that are on the wall, with their ability to talk, the Bluetooth protocol, for example, they could be used for situational awareness and positioning. Where is John relative to those three readers on that floor, to give a pinpoint location? So identity positioning is another concept that is also really important in the scheme of things. And ultimately, it comes back to still a data point of where is John and why is John there, and what does that mean for that particular building, or the scenario that John is in there, why he's on that floor, as an exception, for example.
Yeah, and I imagine in the wake of what's happening now with coming out of COVID, but still a lot of people realizing now, hey, I'm enjoying working from home and all the rest of it. It might also be able to be used to help buildings or help organizations rationalize space in building, where they can look at access points throughout the organization and access points throughout the facilities and go, you know what, that room upstairs or that floor upstairs gets used like 3 hours a week. Do we really need that space anymore?
Yeah, I think you're right, John. The ability to understand how spaces work within buildings, facility managers are forever, and organisations are forever trying to better understand how their buildings work, how much space is required, and controlling occupancy. That there aren't too many people on a particular floor from a fire hazard perspective. There are certain rules in terms of density and occupancy per floor. So how do we control that? And I think knowledge at that point is power. And if we know that we have these data points, I think the ability of systems to make decisions for us and is going to be again, similar to the trend that we spoke about earlier. I think all these things play a part in how buildings work and how we work in enterprise organisations as well.
Yeah. Well, Steve, look, thank you very much for your time. If people would like to know more about you or get in contact with HID to find out more about some of these solutions we've discussed, where do they go?
So hidglobal.com, and then we can. There are links there through to specific marketing inquiries, sales leads, and contact information.
Yeah, and I'm sure, I would imagine you've got a whole bunch of interesting case studies and all the rest of it there that could talk more about, how some of those solutions are being used and some of the use cases.
Absolutely, and always happy to talk to customers about where they see their security infrastructure going and how we might be able to assist them in their journey into the security space and increasingly digital security space.
Fantastic. All right, Steve, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, John.